Hey everyone, so you clicked on this video because you want to learn how to solve quadratic equations using the factoring method. I'm going to show you some easy steps to do that. If this is too basic for you and you want to learn how to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, click on this link up here to find out how you can do that. If that is also too basic for you, then maybe click on this link up here to learn how you can solve simultaneous equations or systems of equations that involve a linear equation and a quadratic equation. However, if you want to learn the basics of factoring method, keep watching this video. My name is Peter, grab your calculator and let's get started. In today's video, we're going to look at how to solve quadratic equations using the factoring method. Below here is a general quadratic equation where a, b, and c are constants and x is the unknown variable. So whenever we want to solve any equation, what we're trying to do is to figure out what are the values of x that make this equation true. In all the equations, the quadratic equations that we're going to solve in today's video, they will always be equal to 0. If they're not equal to 0, I'm going to show you some techniques to make sure that the value on this other side is 0. Let's take a look at some tips on how we're going to go through the process today. So the first tip, make sure you arrange terms in standard form. So standard form is where you have the a constant is first, the b constant is second, and the c constant is last. Number 2, identify the coefficients a, b, and c. Number 3, find the product and sum. Number 4, factor in pairs and then solve. Once we start working on a few examples, all of these steps, all of these tips are going to start to make sense. So let's take a look at the first example. So the first example we're going to look at is a quadratic equation. And this quadratic equation, we can see that the first term is squared, the second term is just x, and the third term is a constant. Whenever you see the terms are arranged this way, they're in the standard form. The other thing that you'll notice is they are set equal to 0. The value here is 0. Now we can go ahead, we need to identify what is A, what is B, and what is C. A in this case is a 1, B is 14, and C is 45. The third thing we need to do is now to look for the product and the sum. So in this case, the product is going to be 45. 45 because we multiply C times A. So A was 1 and C 45, so 45 times 1 is 45, and then the sum is going to be the middle constant, which is 14. Now the next part, we need to look for two numbers where if we multiply them we get 45, and if we add those two numbers we get 14. Those two numbers are going to be 9 and 5, because 9 times 5 is 45, 9 plus 5 is 14. Now once we get the product and the sum, these two values, we're going to put them back into the equation and rewrite that quadratic equation. So we're going to rewrite it this way: x squared plus 9x plus 5x plus 45 equals to 0. We have not changed the equation. All we just did was to rewrite. We removed the 14x and replaced it with 9x plus 5x. So the next part is to factor in pairs. So x squared and 9x will form the first pair. 5x and 45 will form the second pair. So in the first pair, we're going to factor out the common factor, which is only x. So I'm going to write x parentheses, x plus 9, close the parentheses. The next two terms, the only common factor is the number 5. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out a positive 5. And then inside the parentheses, I'll have my x plus 9 equals to 0. Now in this step, if you did this process correctly, the values that are inside the parentheses should be identical. In the first parentheses, you have x plus 9. In the second parentheses, you have x plus 9. If they are the same, you did the process correctly. And then the next part, we're going to take the values that we factored out, x and 5, and put them inside the same parentheses. So x plus 5 forms the first factor there, and then x plus 9 forms the second factor. So these two factors here, if you multiply them, you're going to get the original quadratic expression. And then all we need to do now is set this equal to 0, and then now we can solve. If you multiply two factors and you get 0, we know that either one of those two factors is 0 or both of them are 0. So we're going to set each of the factors equal to 0. So x plus 5 equals to 0 or x plus 9 is equal to 0. So now we can solve each of the linear equations. X plus 5, when you solve it, you get x equals to -5, and x plus 9, when you solve it, you get x equals to -9. And that's how you solve by factoring. Our second example, we're going to try to factor before we actually start solving. So when you look at the equation, the first thing is to try to make sure that it's in the standard form. All the terms are on one side, and on the other side you have 0. The second thing that we want to do now is, before we identify A, B, and C, we need to see if we can make the expression here a little bit simpler by factoring. So 6, 48, and 54 have a common factor, and the greatest common factor is actually 6. So we're going to factor 6 from all those three constants. So if you factor 6, the first term is going to be x squared, the second term is going to be -8x, and the third term is going to be -9, and we're going to set that equal to 0. The reason why we want to do this is because if you try to solve the first equation here, it's going to be a little bit harder to find the product and the sum. But if we factor out the 6, we can actually remove that constant and then factor the expression in the parentheses. So the next step is to divide 6 on both sides, and the only thing that remains is x squared minus 8x minus 9 equal to 0. So now we're ready to find the product and we're ready to find the sum. So the product and the sum are only the numbers that are left in this expression. Product is multiplying the constant here, -9, and the coefficient of x squared. So -9 times 1 is going to give you -9. Sum is only the coefficient of the middle term, so it's going to be -8. So now we want to look for two numbers such that if you multiply them, you get -9, and if you add the same two numbers, you get -8. Those two numbers are -9 and +1. So let's see if this is actually true. -9 times +1 is -9. -9 plus +1 is -8. So now we have those two numbers. We're going to rewrite our expression with those two numbers, and it's going to be x squared minus 9x plus x minus 9 equal to 0. After this, we're going to be factoring in pairs. The first pair is x squared minus 9x, and the second pair is +x minus 9. So the common factor in the first pair is just x. So x parentheses, x minus 9, close parentheses, and the second pair, the common factor is +1, and then parentheses, x minus 9 equals to 0. When you reach this step, you need to check and see if the two parentheses are identical. If this is x minus 9, the other parentheses must also be x minus 9. And then we're going to take the first two terms, the factored terms x and 1, we're going to put them inside a parentheses, and then x minus 9 is going to be in the second parentheses equal to 0. We're going to set each of the parentheses equal to 0. So you have x plus 1 equals to 0 or x minus 9 equals to 0, and then solve the linear equations. So x plus 1 equals to 0, when you solve it, you get x equals to -1, and when you solve the other one, you get x equals to +9. And those are the solutions of that quadratic equation. In the third example, we want to look at how do we rewrite the equation before we start to factor it. This equation here, on the left side, there's a quadratic expression, but on the right side, there's a number 30. So we need to move this 30 over to the left side. So when you move it over to the left side, it changes from a positive number to a negative number. So we'll end up with x squared plus 6x minus 40 equals to 0. It's going to be -40 because the -30 plus the -10 gives you -40. We check again and we see that the quadratic expression has all the terms there, and then now we need to identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is 6, and C is -40. So we can write the product and the sum is going to be, the product is -40 and the sum is +6. The way we get -40 is by multiplying this constant times the coefficient of x squared. The coefficient of x squared is 1. 1 times -40 is -40. The sum is the coefficient of the middle term, so just positive 6. So now we need two numbers. Two numbers, if we multiply them, we get negative 40. If we add them, we get 6. Those two numbers are 10 and negative 4. Let's see if this is true. 10 times negative 4 is negative 40. 10 plus negative 4 is positive 6. So these are the two numbers that we want. We're going to use them to rewrite the quadratic equation. So it becomes x squared plus 10x minus 4x minus 40 equals to 0. We are going to factor the quadratic expression in pairs. So x squared and 10x, they have a common factor, which is x. So we're going to write x parentheses, x plus 10 close parentheses. In the second pair, we have negative 4x and negative 40. The common factor here is negative 4. So we put the parentheses and then we have x plus 10 close parentheses equal to 0. We're going to take x and negative 4 and put them in one parenthesis, and x plus 10 goes into the second parenthesis equal to 0. And then all we need to do now is to set each parenthesis equal to 0. So x minus 4 equals to 0, or x plus 10 equals to 0. And then we can solve these linear equations using one step, and we have x equals to positive 4 and x equals to negative 10. So these are the solutions of this quadratic equation. The final example involves rewriting and then factoring a quadratic expression. So in this particular problem, we see that on the left side here we have 4x squared plus 2x, and on the right side we have a 12. So the first thing we want to do is to move that 12 over to the other side, the left side, and that's going to change the positive 12 to a negative 12. Our expression is going to be 4x squared plus 2x minus 12 equals to 0. Once we get to this point here, we look at the coefficients and the constant 12. We have 4, 2, and negative 12. Those three numbers have a common factor. The greatest common factor is going to be 2. So we're going to factor out the 2, and we end up with 2x squared plus x minus 6 inside parentheses equals to 0. Once it's in this form, we see that this 2 that's on the outside can be removed easily by dividing by it on both sides. When you divide both sides by 2, the only thing that remains on the left side is what's inside the parentheses. 2x squared plus x minus 6 equals to 0. This particular expression here is so much easier to solve than the one that we had at the beginning. So now we can find the product and the sum, and in this case the product is going to be the product of the coefficient of x squared, which is 2, times the constant here, which is negative 6. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. And then the sum is the coefficient of the middle term. The middle term here has an invisible 1. So now we need two numbers such that if we multiply them, we get negative 12. And if we add those two numbers, we get positive 1. Those two numbers are 4 and negative 3. Let's see if those two numbers are going to work. 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. 4 plus negative 3 is going to be positive 1. So we're going to use these two numbers to rewrite our quadratic expression. So it's going to be 2x squared plus 4x minus 3x minus 6 equals to 0. And then we're going to factor in pairs. So the first pair, 2x squared plus 4x, I need to find the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor here is going to be the number 2 and x. So I need to factor out 2x. So when I write 2x inside the parentheses, I'm going to have x plus 2, close parentheses. In the second pair, I have negative 3x and negative 6. The greatest common factor is going to be negative 3. So I'm going to put negative 3 parentheses x plus 2 close parentheses equal to 0. And then I'm going to take the 2x and the negative 3. I'm going to put those two inside the same parentheses and x plus 2 in the other parentheses equal to 0. So each of these parentheses, I'm going to set them equal to 0. 2x minus 3 equals to 0, or x plus 2 equals to 0. Finally, I'm going to solve the first equation here. So 2x minus 3, I need to move this negative 3 over to the right side. side and I'll have 2x equals to positive 3. And then the final step, I just need to get rid of this 2 by dividing both sides, and I'll have x equals to 3 over 2. Here you have the option of changing this improper fraction into a mixed number or a decimal, but if you leave your answer like this, it is perfectly fine. The other equation, x plus 2 equals to 0, the only thing that we need to do is to move that positive 2 over to the right side, and we're going to end up with x is equal to negative 2. And these two here are the solutions of this quadratic equation. Alright, here's a pro tip. If you want to solve quadratic equations using the factoring method, the first thing you gotta do, organize the terms. Make sure they're in the right order. The first term is always the squared term, and then the linear term, and then the constant. Everything that's gonna be on the other side of the equal sign should be a 0. And that's the pro tip. After working on several examples, here are some independent exercises for you to try on your own. All of these exercises should be solved using the factoring method. If you forgot the concept, simply go backwards into the video, watch again, and then attempt the exercises. All of the answers to these exercises can be found in the description below. Good luck!